When he walked into the living room that morning and said, "We're leaving tomorrow, Mom," she thought he was joking, until he placed a set of papers on the table and revealed he had sold the one place she loved more than anything. But what happened next nobody in that family was prepared for. Before you judge his decision, before you decide who's right or wrong, listen to what came after that conversation. When he walked into the room that morning and said, "We're leaving tomorrow, Mom, I sold your beach house," the world around her stopped. You could almost hear the silence break. Her hand froze on the cup in front of her, her breath caught, and for a moment she wasn't here. She was somewhere in the past, somewhere only she understood. And here's the part that will force any listener to stay until the very end. What he did wasn't betrayal. It wasn't impulsive cruelty. It wasn't selfishness. It was the only decision that could finally set her free, even if she had no idea she needed saving. That's why I want you to listen to every second of this story. Because whatever you think you don't know what was coming next. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing the words he would say, knowing there was no gentle way to break her heart and still protect her from a bigger pain. The beach house wasn't just a building by the water. It was a shrine of memories, a museum of moments she refused to move on from. Every summer, every storm, every sunset, she kept going back to a place that held her together while quietly tearing her apart. He knew it, he saw it, but she pretended she didn't. And sometimes the hardest truth is the one we've repeated to ourselves so long we start believing the lie. When he told her they were leaving tomorrow, she laughed at first. She thought it was a prank, another one of his dramatic surprises. But then he placed the folder on the table, the documents, the signatures, the finality, and suddenly she wasn't laughing. Her eyes softened, her posture weakened, and she whispered, "You sold it without asking me." The kind of whisper that isn't anger. It's disbelief soaked in fear. The fear of losing the last place that reminded her of someone she lost. The fear of letting go of the place that felt like the only thing still holding his memory. But he didn't break eye contact. Because he had found something she didn't know he knew. Something hidden behind a locked drawer she had forgotten existed. A stack of unsent letters. Letters addressed to the man she once loved, the man who left and never said goodbye. Letters she wrote every year in that house, sitting on the same old wooden chair facing the ocean. Letters she never mailed, because the ocean was the only thing that ever listened. He read them, not to invade her privacy, but because he needed to understand the weight she carried. And when he did, it all made sense. The house wasn't healing her anymore. It was trapping her in a memory she couldn't escape. So he sold the house not to take something from her, but to give something back: her life, her future, the part of herself she abandoned at the shoreline years ago. But she didn't know that yet. All she saw in that moment was the son she trusted making a decision she thought he had no right to make. She froze, she shut down, and he let her. Because sometimes the truth only reaches a person when the anger burns out, when the silence grows heavy enough to be heard. That night, as they packed, she finally broke the silence. She asked him why, not with fury, but with tired eyes. Eyes that had cried too many times in that same beach house. He told her everything: the letters, the memories he could feel without ever living them, the way she sat alone on the porch every night pretending she was watching the ocean when she was really waiting for someone who was never coming back. He told her how life had given her 1,000 reasons to move forward, but she kept walking backward to the same pain. And he knew that if he didn't stop her, she would grow old waiting for a wave that would never return what she lost. They left the next morning before sunrise. She didn't say a word at first. She looked out the window as the town grew smaller, and the ocean disappeared behind the hills. But something changed in her silence, the kind of silence that isn't grief anymore. It's release. It's acceptance slowly forming like dawn breaking after the longest night. And on that drive, she finally whispered something he had waited years to hear. Not forgiveness, not approval, But the truth she never admitted aloud, the truth that the house was the only place where she still felt him close, and she didn't know who she was without that pain. What he said next broke her and healed her all at once. He told her she didn't need a house to keep love alive. She didn't need a memory to feel connected. She didn't need a place to mourn. What she needed was a future that wasn't chained to the past. And for the first time, she realized he wasn't taking her away from something. He was leading her to something she had forgotten existed. When a son makes a decision that shakes the ground beneath his mother's feet, it's rarely a decision born from impulse. It comes from watching silently, understanding deeply, and carrying a responsibility he never asked for but accepted anyway. The moment he told her, "I sold your beach house," the world seemed to tilt on its axis. To anyone else, it might sound like a betrayal, a reckless act, an unforgivable choice. But when you peel back the layers, when you step into the silence between them, you begin to understand that this wasn't just a decision. It was a lifeline thrown to someone who didn't realize she was drowning. He had watched her cling to that house for years, holding on to it the way a person grips a memory that's both precious and painful. Every time she walked through its doors, her energy shifted. She moved as if the air around her was heavier, echoing with voices from the past. She smiled, yes, but they were smiles that never reached her eyes. Behind every smile, he could almost hear the shadow of a sob she never allowed herself to release. And he, as her son, carried the weight of knowing that the place she loved most had also become the place that slowly consumed her. But how do you tell someone that the sanctuary they have built around their heart is becoming their prison? How do you ask a mother to let go of something she believes is a lifeline, when in reality it is an anchor tied to memories she cannot escape? He held that question for years, unsure of when or how to face it. But every visit to the house, every quiet moment when he watched her stare at the ocean, as if searching for an answer, pushed him closer to the truth. The truth that she was stuck. The truth that she had stopped living in the present long ago. The truth that her life had been paused at the moment she lost the person she associated with that place. Sometimes love demands that you step into the role of protector, even if it means becoming the villain in someone else's story for a moment. He knew she would never willingly let the house go. She had woven too much of herself into its walls. She had buried her tears in its corners, sealed her grief beneath its floorboards, and whispered secrets into the breeze that only the ocean ever heard. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a memory carved into wood and stone, and she lived inside that memory more than she lived in the real world. He started noticing how every trip ended the same way. She returned quieter, more distant, as if she was withdrawing into a place no one could follow. She kept the house alive but let her own life shrink, making decisions based not on growth but on fear. A fear of moving on, a fear of forgetting, a fear of betraying the past by choosing the future. And he knew if someone didn't intervene, she would spend the rest of her life protecting a house instead of protecting herself. So he made the decision, not quickly, not easily, not carelessly. It took months of paperwork, meetings, conversations with people who asked him repeatedly, "Are you sure she's okay with this?" He always answered, "No, but I'm doing it for her." They didn't understand. How could they? They hadn't read the unsent letters he found hidden away. They hadn't seen her fall apart when she thought no one was watching. They hadn't witnessed the quiet moments when she would sit on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon, not seeing the ocean but seeing a ghost from a past she refused to release. He had to become the bridge she didn't have the strength to build herself, and sometimes bridges require you to break the ground before you can lay the foundation. The beach house was that ground, and selling it was the only way to help her cross into a new life. He knew the moment he told her would be the hardest part. He replayed it in his mind over and over, her face tightening, her eyes filling with disbelief, her voice cracking just enough for him to hear the shatter inside her. He knew she would think he was taking something from her, but the truth was, he was returning something she had lost without realizing it. He was giving her back a future free from the weight of memories she didn't know how to carry anymore. He wasn't trying to erase the past. He wasn't trying to stop her from remembering. He wasn't trying to invalidate the love she once had. He was trying to help her reclaim the part of herself that had been buried under years of emotional debris. He was trying to give her room to breathe again, room to grow again, room to rediscover who she was before grief took hold of her. A child becomes an adult the moment they understand that love isn't always about doing what feels good. Sometimes love is choosing the storm because you know the sky will be clearer afterward. Sometimes love is breaking something so it can be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes love is making a decision that hurts now to heal later. He didn't know how she would react. He didn't know how long it would take for her to understand, but he knew with every part of his heart that he made the choice not out of authority but out of love. And he hoped that one day she would see that too. The beach house was more than wood, windows, and waves. It was a living diary, a place where memories soaked into curtains, drifted through hallways, and clung to the corners like shadows that refused to fade. To anyone else, it looked like a peaceful escape, a retreat blessed with sunlight, salt air, and the rhythm of the tide. But to her, it was a sacred place wrapped in invisible threads of emotion, each thread tied to a moment she could neither fully embrace nor truly let go. The truth behind the beach house wasn't something she ever said aloud. She protected it the way people protect fragile things, with silence, with denial, with a smile that hides more than it reveals. He didn't understand that truth at first. He only saw what she showed, the quiet joy in her eyes when they arrived, the ritual way she opened the windows, the soft sigh of relief when the ocean breeze touched her face. But as he grew older, he began noticing the shift. The joy was real, but it was layered over something heavier, something tender and unresolved, something she carried like a weight pressed gently against her chest. There were moments when she would walk through the house, touching objects, as if they were more alive than she was, her fingers grazing the chipped paint on the railing, the old seashell wind chime, the faded photograph frames. She would stand in the hallway a little too long, stare at the ocean from the same spot every time, sit on the porch in the same chair, as if rooted there by memory. These small details began forming a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. The beach house wasn't just a place she loved. It was the place she hid the parts of herself she couldn't face anywhere else. He noticed that she never invited people there. Even family visits felt selective, careful. She would light up when talking about the house, but the moment someone suggested renting it out, selling it, or even renovating it, her expression tightened. The house had to stay the same. The paint could peel, the floorboards could creak, the furniture could grow older, but nothing could change. Because change meant letting go, and letting go meant losing the fragile connection she had preserved for years. He didn't know the full story until he stumbled upon the letters. They were tucked away in a drawer he didn't even know existed, underneath blankets she never used. The letters were written in her handwriting, soft, rounded letters with a kind of hesitant elegance. They were addressed to someone he barely remembered, someone whose presence existed only in old photographs and half-finished sentences. He opened one letter, then another and another, each filled with words she never sent, emotions she never expressed, questions she never received answers to. And suddenly, the entire house made sense. The house wasn't a vacation spot. It wasn't a place for rest. It was the last physical connection to the man she once loved, his father, her soulmate, the person who had walked into her life like sunlight and walked out of it like a cold wind. Some losses break loudly. Hers broke quietly, silently, in a way that left no debris except the house they once dreamed of filling with memories. She had been carrying that quiet grief for years, weaving it into the walls until the house became the only place where she allowed herself to feel the fullness of what she lost. Reading the letters didn't make him angry, it made him understand. The beach house wasn't a symbol of joy, it was a symbol of unfinished grief. It was where she went to keep her pain alive because the pain made her feel connected to him. Letting go of the house felt like letting go of the last piece of a life she once imagined. And who willingly lets go of the place where their heart last felt whole? Every summer she drove to that house as if answering a call. And each time she returned, something inside her seemed a little more fragile. She would sit quietly during car rides, lost in thoughts she never shared. He had watched her smile during sunsets, only to see her wipe her eyes when she thought no one noticed. The house wasn't healing her. It was keeping her trapped in a loop of memories she couldn't escape, reliving moments she never got closure for. But she wasn't aware of the trap. That's the thing about emotional wounds. They can become comforting if you've carried them long enough. The familiar pain feels safer than the unknown freedom beyond it. She thought the house was her sanctuary. But a sanctuary becomes a prison the moment you stop visiting it and start living inside it emotionally. Years passed, and she became anchored to that place. Holidays, birthdays, Sundays, everything revolved around the house. He saw her turning down invitations, avoiding new plans, making excuses to go back to the beach even when she didn't need to. She wasn't going for the ocean, she wasn't going for rest. She was going because she didn't know how to move forward, and the house was the last place she felt connected to a time when her life still made sense. The truth behind the beach house was a truth she never intended to reveal. It was a truth formed from love, loss, hope, and heartbreak all tangled together. It was a truth too painful to speak and too precious to abandon. It was the truth that the house held memories she wasn't ready to release. But those memories weren't nurturing her. They were consuming her slowly, piece by piece. The more he understood, the more he realized that holding on to the house wasn't saving her. It was breaking her, and he began asking himself the hardest questions. How do you help someone let go of a place that holds their past? How do you tell a mother her most cherished refuge is the source of her quiet suffering? How do you separate the memory of a person from the physical place they once occupied? How do you help someone heal when the wound is tied to the only thing they believe keeps them whole? The truth behind the beach house was not about property. It was about love that never ended, closure that never came, and a story she tried to protect by keeping it locked inside walls that smelled of sea salt and forgotten summers. And once he understood this truth, he realized that selling the house was not about removing her from something she loved. It was about rescuing her from the grip of a past she couldn't escape. The next day arrived with a quiet tension that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky already carried that pale blue glow that signals a new beginning, even when the heart isn't ready for it. He woke before his alarm, not from rest, but from the weight of what was coming. She moved through the house slowly, not sluggishly, but with the heaviness of someone packing more than clothes, packing memories, emotions, a lifetime of unspoken thoughts. The air felt thick, as if the house itself understood this was the last time it would witness this version of them. They loaded the car in silence. Not angry silence, not cold silence, but a silence made of questions neither of them had found the courage to voice. She held the keys to the beach house one last time, her fingers brushing the worn metal as though it were a living thing. Then she placed them in his hand without looking at him, and that simple gesture carried more emotion than all the shouting in the world. It was the moment she accepted, not willingly, but because she had no choice left. The road stretched ahead of them, winding between hills and coastlines they had driven through countless times. But this drive was different. She didn't stare at the scenery the way she usually did. She didn't comment on the waves or the seabirds or the old lighthouse perched on the edge of the cliff. Instead, she looked as if she were staring inward, replaying memories she had kept locked away for too long. He could tell she was trying to prepare herself for something. even if she didn't know what it was. Hours passed before she finally spoke, and when she did, her voice was almost too soft to hear. She asked him why he didn't tell her sooner, why he felt he needed to carry this burden alone, why he thought she couldn't handle the truth. He listened, letting her words settle before answering, and when he finally did, he didn't speak with justification or excuses. He spoke with honesty. He told her he didn't tell her because he didn't know how, because every time he imagined saying the words, he pictured the look in her eyes, the same look she had the day she received the news that changed their lives forever. He couldn't bring himself to put that look on her face again. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she clasped her hands together tightly, the way she used to when she was trying not to cry. And he realized then that this drive wasn't just a physical journey, it was emotional excavation. It was the first time she was being forced to face what she had avoided for years. The truth wasn't just about the house. It was about the part of her life that froze in place the day she lost the man she loved. The house wasn't the memory, she was the memory. She carried it in her heartbeat, in the way she spoke, in the way she smiled just a little less every year. As they drove, he told her about the letters. He told her how he found them, how he struggled with whether to read them, how guilty he felt even as he opened the first one. But he also told her that reading them helped him understand her in a way he never did before. The letters weren't just messages to the past. They were confessions. They were wounds she never treated. They were reminders of a love she never stopped feeling. He told her that he read every word not to invade her privacy, but to understand the depth of the pain she carried alone. She didn't interrupt. She let him speak, her gaze fixed on the window as the scenery blurred by. When he finished, she whispered, almost to herself, that those letters were the only thing that made her feel connected to him, that the house was the only place where she felt safe enough to let the grief surface, that she was afraid that if she let the house go, she would lose the last piece of him she still had left. He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He simply reached for her hand, not forcefully, not dramatically, but gently, the way a person reaches for someone who has carried too much for too long. She let him hold her hand, and in that small gesture, something shifted. She wasn't alone in her pain anymore. For the first time, she allowed someone else to carry a piece of it. The drive continued, and slowly the silence between them softened. She began to talk, not about the house, but about the memories. She talked about how she and his father would sit on the porch listening to the waves, how they dreamed of painting the kitchen bright yellow, but never got around to it, how he used to write little notes and hide them in different rooms for her to find. She talked about the good times, the laughter, the warmth, and then she talked about the moment it all ended, the moment she got the news, the moment she realized life doesn't give warnings before it takes something away. He listened, letting her speak freely, letting her unravel years of silence. He realized then that this trip wasn't just for closure. It was for release. She wasn't just saying goodbye to the house. She was confronting the grief she had kept locked inside her ribcage for longer than he had been alive. As they approached their destination, her breathing steadied. She sat straighter. Her voice grew stronger. She began to speak about the future cautiously, like someone learning a new language. She wondered aloud what would happen next, what life would look like without the house, whether she could ever be ready to let go. And he told her she didn't have to be ready. She just had to be willing, and she nodded, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't bother to hide. By the time they reached the city, something unspoken had shifted between them. She wasn't the same woman who locked her emotions behind smiles and quiet sighs. And he wasn't the same son who carried the burden alone. The trip had become a journey of truth, of confrontation, of connection. It stripped away the walls they both built and forced them to stand in front of their pain without running from it. The car didn't just bring them to a new place. It brought them to a new understanding, a realization that healing doesn't happen in familiar rooms filled with memories. It happens when you're willing to walk away from the place where the past holds you captive and take the first step into a life that is waiting to begin. The moment they arrived at their destination, something subtle but unmistakable shifted in the air, not a dramatic change, not a sudden transformation, but the kind of quiet shift that happens when a person finally steps out of the shadow they've been living under without realizing it. She stood outside the car for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, holding herself as if she wasn't sure whether she was supposed to feel relieved or heartbroken. He watched her closely, not intrusively, but with the protective awareness of someone who knew this moment would define everything that happened next. There was a stillness around her, the stillness of a woman processing a loss that felt both old and new at the same time. The beach house was gone now, and all she had left were the pieces of herself she had been avoiding for years. They walked slowly, neither rushing nor hesitating, moving as if their steps carried emotions that words hadn't yet caught up with. She didn't ask questions, she didn't look back at the road behind them. Instead, she took each step forward like a decision, a small, quiet commitment to facing what came next. And in those steps lay a lesson neither of them had expected, that sometimes the future begins in silence, not celebration. He sensed that inside her a storm was settling, not disappearing, not calming, but settling in a way that allowed her to breathe in deeper, steadier ways. For years, she had lived emotionally curled inward, protecting wounds she believed were too fragile to open. But now, for the first time, she was walking without the weight of a house that held her captive to memories she couldn't escape. She was walking as someone who had nothing left to hide behind. And that kind of vulnerability is terrifying, but it is also the doorway to something new. Later that evening, when they sat in the small apartment he had rented for her temporarily, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, exhausted, but clearer than it had been in years. She said she didn't know who she was without the house, that it had become part of her identity, her routine, her refuge. She admitted that she wasn't sure whether she had been holding on to love or just holding onto the pain because it was familiar. And hearing her say that broke something open inside him, because for the first time, she wasn't talking about the past as a story she was trapped in. She was talking about it as something she was ready to understand. He told her he didn't expect her to move on overnight. He didn't expect her to forget. He didn't expect her to suddenly feel free. He told her the only thing he hoped for was that she would stop carrying pain alone, stop believing she needed a place to keep her memories alive, and start believing she was allowed to live again. She didn't answer right away. She just closed her eyes, letting his words settle the way rain settles into dry soil. Over the next few days, she began to do something he hadn't seen her do in years. She reflected, not obsessively, not painfully, but thoughtfully. She talked about her past with honesty instead of avoidance. She admitted she had spent so many years trying to protect the memory of a man she loved that she forgot to protect herself. She shared stories she had never told, stories of the way grief had followed her home at night, how she would sit in the beach house whispering apologies to the empty rooms for things she had no control over, how she feared that letting go meant letting him fade from her life completely. And then one morning, without prompting, she told him she understood why he did what he did. She said she didn't agree with how he chose to handle it, and she wasn't pretending the pain was gone. But she told him that selling the house forced her to confront the truth she had buried under layers of routine and sentimentality. She realized she had been living with one foot in the past and one foot hesitating to step into the future. And she understood now that grief doesn't disappear when you hold onto a place. It only settles deeper into your bones. She told him something else too, something he never expected to hear. She said that the house wasn't what kept her connected to the man she loved. Her memories were, her heart was, her life was. She realized that love didn't need walls to exist, didn't need rooms to echo through. Love could live anywhere, as long as she allowed herself to carry it forward instead of trapping it in a place she could never truly return to. Her words brought him to a realization he hadn't fully understood until that moment. He thought selling the house was the lesson, that letting go of the physical space would heal the emotional wound. But the real lesson was deeper. The real lesson was that freedom doesn't come from losing something. It comes from understanding that you were never meant to be held by it in the first place. In the days that followed, she began doing something small but remarkable. She rebuilt. Not her past, not her memories, but herself. She took short walks, talked openly about things she used to avoid, allowed moments of quiet without slipping into sadness. She started sorting through the letters not to cling to them, but to release the weight they carried. She read some aloud, and instead of tears falling like they once did, her voice trembled with acceptance. She even began writing new letters, not to the man she lost, but to the woman she wanted to become. He watched her change in ways that felt both fragile and powerful. She wasn't healed. She wasn't suddenly a different person. But she was finally facing the part of her life she had kept hidden behind the beach house walls. And in doing so, she was teaching him something too, that sometimes love means giving someone space to rediscover themselves after a long period of being lost. That sometimes love means making a decision they don't understand until they're ready. That sometimes love means being the storm before you can become the calm. The lesson nobody saw coming wasn't about selling a house. It wasn't about endings or new beginnings. It was about truth. The truth that healing disguises itself as loss. The truth that courage often looks like pain before it turns into strength. The truth that the past can only hold you as long as you are willing to be held. And the truth that letting go is not the act of forgetting. It is the act of choosing yourself again. And in choosing herself, even slowly, even cautiously, she stepped into a future she never believed she deserved until now.